recorded and it'll be streamed on the District 287 YouTube channel. The recording will be available after the meeting, accessible from the Intermediate District 287 School Board website in the School Board section. The public is invited to share their thoughts and comments. And I'd invite people to refresh their board book premiere if you're following electronically. And we've just had an update in section 8 about the school board calendar. So I would invite you to refresh if you've had your meeting agenda up earlier. At this time, I'd like to invite board member Adam Seidel to please read the District 287 mission statement. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you, Chair Neville. The mission of Intermediate District 287 is to be the premier provider of innovative specialized services to ensure that each member district can meet the unique learning needs of its students.
Thank you. And at this time, I would invite our clerk, Crystal Brackey, to please call the roll as she states each board member's name.
I'm Chef Pat Brannick. I am the Cooking for Independent Living instructor and the Culinary Arts instructor for District 287's Pathways program at HTC. And I'd like to talk about a young man who I think has a superpower, and that superpower is determination. Mustafa Muhammad, remarkable young man. He is originally from Djibouti, and he is deaf. And this young man his determination will get him anywhere he wants to go in life. He is a treat. He makes my job really, really easy just from his ambition and desire to learn. He speaks sign language and works with a tremendous staff at 287 that, helps me communicate with him. And it's not an easy task for them because he is accustomed to sign language in a different language. And he works tremendously hard to achieve and accomplish his goals. And this young man will achieve and accomplish any goal he sets out to do. We always have a few students every year that would probably fit the description of having a superpower, just being that special, outstanding kid. And this year, when I was asked that question, immediately Mustafa came to mind. So big thumbs up, Mustafa. I'm super proud of you, and it's an honor to work with you. And you just keep doing the things the way you do them, and you'll go very far in life.
So I was going to introduce Mustafa and more about him, and I thought, why don't you guys get to see him do this? And you can see how beautiful this is, and to watch the communication, the time, and the patience that that it takes for our staff to work with all of our DHH students. But to tell you a little bit about him, he's in his second year of our transition program at WEC. He's part of our deaf and hard of hearing program. And through the program and our Project Vector grant, he has thrived. He's getting ready to start his internship at the Seward Co-op. He's hungry to learn. He's working on English, Somali, and American Sign Language, neither of which are common languages for him. So he's learning this all while with us. It's amazing. He's a fantastic soccer player and a joy to have in our program. His smile, I hope you get to see that, lights up a room. This is my second year supporting the DHH program, and I've learned so much from each of the students and the staff. And I wanted you to have a couple minutes. You'll notice it was 4 minutes. I was trying to pare it down because I know all of our time is precious. But then I also understand this is our work, and you can't rush when you're looking at 3 different languages. So you get to see how beautiful this is for yourself. So here's Mustafa. I let him introduce himself.
Can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Mustafa Mohammed. I live in Minneapolis. I was born in Djibouti, which is a country in Africa.
Could you talk a little bit more about your background?
So I have 6 brothers and 3 sisters, and I live with them and my parents. So I have a large family.
When did you move to the United States?
I moved to the United States in 2013 with my family.
When you came to the United States, talk to me about your language.
I had moved to America, but I lived in a different country, Africa.
Did you know ASL, English, or Somali when you came?
In Djibouti in Africa, they spoke Somali, but it was very difficult for me to understand them. Communication was very difficult. Since I've moved here, I've been learning and improving my language skills in American Sign Language, English, and Somali, and I'm feeling very confident about it. It's making me feel a lot better about myself.
Can you tell me about your program at school?
So the program here so I'm going to the Vector Transition Tier 2 for DHH students.
What are you working on in that program?
So I'm going to school here at West Education Center. I'm improving my math skills, my English skills, and my language skills, specifically American Sign Language. And I'm going to the Cooking Pathways program at Hennepin Technical College.
What do you like about school?
So if I was going to other transition programs, I would be alone there. I would be the only deaf person there. Here I have interpreters who sign, I have a teacher who signs, I have a social worker that signs, and hearing students and staff are all very supportive.
Do you have anything else you want to say about this program?
This program is inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Alexia, is it all right if we ask you a couple of questions or share comments?
Sure. I'm teary, but yes.
Oh, well, it's outstanding. It's just the journey that he's taken and the support from 287 is really extraordinary. So a thank you to everyone in the program who is doing such amazing work. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Okay, I don't see anything in particular. So thank you so much. This is always the best part of the board meeting, when we get to meet students and learn about their own journeys and what they're doing. And this is just incredible. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the time.
Absolutely. And please share our thanks to everyone involved with the video. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thank you. You guys too. Take care.
Yes. Okay, the next item on our agenda is the superintendent report. Top 5 things to know about going back to school. So welcome, Superintendent Lewandowski.
Yeah, thank you. We decided we're having a second time back at school this year for all the obvious reasons. And this week was very special in that we now have all the students back who elected to come back to face-to-face instruction. There are still some that have elected to do distance learning, stay in distance learning. But we thought it would be important to highlight some of the things that have happened to get us to this place, and also to answer any questions the board might have now that we're back in full session. So I've asked Ben and Elizabeth to provide an overview. Welcome.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the board and Superintendent Lewandowski. I'm really excited to be here along with Ben McGrath. I'm Elizabeth Lodge Rogers, the Assistant Superintendent for Programs and Services. And on this almost to the year anniversary of when we had to go into distance learning last year as a school district and really virtually the whole state, we're here to share a little bit with you, as Sandy mentioned, about how things are going in this new back to school celebration, really, in so many ways this year. We're going to talk a little bit about where we are in terms of testing for our staff and vaccines. Share a little bit about who is back in in-person learning right now. All our students have the opportunity to be in person. What we're doing in terms of supporting our students around mental health and trauma, as well as supporting our staff. A little bit on our staffing accommodations, and just a moment to talk a little bit about our teamwork and collaboration efforts. So we are very fortunate, through great effort by our superintendent, I believe, and Jay Korsh, our health and safety manager, have been able to offer vaccines to all our staff, all our contracted staff who come in and work with our students, as well as partner organizations. Everyone has had the opportunity to be vaccinated. We also continue to offer on-site COVID saliva testing every 2 weeks. And while we are not tracking all the staff who might have been vaccinated, who have actually received it, we do know that some staff continue to ask us about availability. So I think that's kind of a continuous problem. Or not problem, actually a good thing, because we're able to provide that. Oh, I'm sorry. I think we're having a little trouble getting our, is it up there now? While we're trying to get our slideshow up, I know Ben is going to share a little bit with what our numbers actually look like in terms of who has returned to in-person schooling. And what that looks like. Okay, good. Now we're there, right? Do we share or present? So Ben, I'll let you talk a little bit about those.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and apologies for the technology glitches there, but good evening, members of the board, Board Chair Neville, Superintendent Lewandowski. Thanks for this opportunity to be here tonight. As Elizabeth mentioned and Sandy mentioned, that we do have all of our students with the opportunity to come back in-person learning once again. As of March 2nd, we made that opportunity available for all of our students, including our high school and transition age students. And we wanted to know exactly how many students were coming back into our buildings. And what we know now that as of last week at least, about 66% of our students are accessing in-person learning. And that when we look specifically at our setting for students, our students in special education, that we have about 77% of those students accessing everyday in-person learning. When we look at our students who are in our ALC or academy programs, that number is around 49%. And keep in mind that some of our students in ALC programs were accessing some of their learning in a remote fashion pre-pandemic. And so that number is expected to be a little bit lower. We've also wanted to make sure that we understand this our data by demographics and the breakdown disaggregated by race. That first column that you see in the shaded part of the table for our Native American students, that is a small sample size. That N is 6. And so there's 3 students coming in for in-person learning and 3 students still accessing remote learning. For all of our other students, the disaggregation by race is somewhere between 60 and 71%, with our Asian students on the high end of the 71% and our Latinx students on the lower end at 60%, accessing everyday in-person learning. As many of you know, that our strategic priority on becoming a trauma-sensitive, a trauma-responsive organization was made before we moved into a pandemic. That it was part of who we said we are and who we wanted to become as an organization to best serve our students. And now in the middle, hopefully towards the end of a pandemic, what we're realizing is that that could never be more right on than what it is now. That the effects of the pandemic have been real for lots of our students and lots of our families. And the work that we did prior with Dr. Bruce Perry and the work that we did to develop this strategic priority is giving us an opportunity to really serve our students now in a way that they need us to. And just some key concepts that we have from Dr. Perry's work. One of them around regulate, relate, and reason. As a way for our staff to think about how do they show up for students when they walk into our building or work with another staff member or a family. At first, we have to regulate before we can relate, before we can get at the prefrontal cortex. Those learnings that we had done before and that priority on becoming trauma sensitive is helping us serve our students better now. But we also knew that our staff, and particularly our licensed mental health staff, they needed more targeted and specific training. And Tanya Allen, who's with us here tonight, has done a really great job of saying, what is the best professional development for our mental health staff? And how are we going to make sure we give them more of what they need? That too has been an important part of how we've been trauma responsive since we've been fully back in person. And lastly, and some of you may recall that we have 2 large grants in our district. That we have a STOP grant, which is a $500,000 over 3 years. And we have Project Aware, which is a little bit over $2.1 million over 5 years. And those grants have been really important for us to deliver and be proactive in the way that we support our students and family as well as responsive when we need to be responsive to a critical incident or another need of our students. So one, they've been good in the way that we have accessed them in the past, but we also realize that there might be ways for us to leverage those funds and resources differently. So we've stepped back and considered how might we write a grant revision to make sure that those funds that I mentioned are being used in the best possible way to support our students and our families and our staff. And that's some of the work that we're engaged in right now is what could that look like?
As our students return to in-person learning for the bulk of their time, we've had to kind of revisit and work with our staff to make sure that we have staff in the building, and we've been able to do that. Staff have been great. Michelle Axel in the HR department, myself, and our school leaders have met with each staff who was working remotely and have worked through a process and updated those accommodations and have staff back in school. And we have been a little bit challenged by making sure that we were spreading out enough. So we're using every bit of space in our buildings, but our staff are there. We're able to staff appropriately in our classrooms and across our building. And certainly students and staff are happy to be present and in person with each other. I think one thing we've learned is something that we kind of knew, but at the heart of our work and the work we do as an intermediate district with our working on behalf of our members is collaboration and teamwork are key. And that has simply abounded. It's been an abundance of that in this time over the last year. We really want to take this time to just share our gratitude for the teamwork, the patience, and the understanding with all our partners, our students, our families, our member districts, our staff. I feel like we've been able to work together in a productive way and make sure that we were making the best decisions. And no doubt, we learned a lot along the way. We've been open to revising and rethinking decisions, but that has been done through from a spirit of collaboration and appreciation. And as we've often said, a lot of grace given for a lot of folks working really hard to make this work. And so we are so grateful for that. Ben's going to talk a little bit about where we go from now in terms of learning models and what we're thinking ahead should things change. Because as we've had in this year, we've had to pivot periodically.
Thanks again. So we've spent the last really several weeks thinking about what would our models look like if case rates did go back up dramatically here across our broader community or in our district. That as, again, many of us recall, the way that we got to the place we are now with all of our students with the opportunity to access in-person learning was through essentially a grade banded method. That we added some grades a little bit at a time, staggering over the course of several weeks. And the work that we have been doing over the last couple of weeks is to really rethink that. Take the guidance that we've been given by the state of Minnesota on considering 5% students and staff who either have COVID or are presenting flu-like symptoms as part of our decision-making. The recommendation is you reach that threshold is to work with your regional support team. So certainly doing that. But unlike the way that we got to where we are now in that grade band approach, that if the case rates were to go back up dramatically, we would use a far more targeted approach and use that 5% threshold to consider whether we close by classroom or by program or by school before we would take a whole district approach and dial back in the way that we got here today. So what we wanted to make sure we communicated tonight was that we've spent a fair amount of time working on being proactive and thinking about the way that this can and should look given state guidance, and the way to ensure that as many of our students have the opportunity for in-person learning that is safely as possible. The second additional note that we wanted to share tonight was around how we've also spent a fair amount of time also being fairly proactive, and how do we rethink education? Now, this conversation's in both popular media and across educational literature, and probably in every one of our member districts. That many of us have viewed the pandemic as an opportunity to rethink how we're going to do things differently. How can we reimagine school in a way that we never would have before the pandemic? And we've taken that work to heart. And that's been an important part of how we've thought about what would the future look like. But what we also realize is the responsibility that we have to rethink education. It's not just about the opportunity that we have because of COVID. It's also the responsibility that we have to address the achievement gap in our state and here in our district. As we all know, that if we looked at standardized test scores for the state of Minnesota, our Black and Latino students are scoring at less than half of a proficiency rate than our white students. And those challenges around the achievement gap, it's not just an opportunity because of the pandemic. It's a responsibility that as we rethink education, we have to rethink it in a way that's going to not lead us to the same outcomes that we've gotten. And that those opportunity gaps that our students and families are experiencing, that part of our solution, part of our path forward has to be a recognition that what we did before didn't work. And it hasn't worked. And so I think for this work that we're engaged in, that we would all characterize it as not just an opportunity, but also a responsibility that we have to do this better and do this different. The last thing that I wanted to share is a really simple engagement strategy that you may be familiar with. And board members, I'm going to ask you to play along here in just a minute. Now, this engagement strategy is, again, really simple. It's just 2 stars and a wish. In the case of us, what we're talking about are 2 things that we think went pretty well, all things considered, with COVID and the pandemic over the last year. And 1 wish, what's something that we wish we would have done a little bit better? Had we known certain things, or had we thought about it in a different way? So 2 stars and a wish, and I'm going to show you some responses that we collected from our district and building leadership. And then I'd love to open it up and see if any of you are willing to share a reflection either from 287, your home district, or just education period about a star or a wish. So first, this is the Jamboard activity that we used, and Jamboard is just a platform to be able to collect multiple voices and ideas. And there's a lot happening on this screen, and so I'm not going to try to read through all of the Post-it notes here, but I'm just going to call out a few of them. The top half are the stars that, again, our district leaders and building leaders named in this exercise that we did with our incident command over the last couple of weeks. And one of them is around being able to provide a one-to-one technology environment. The pandemic had pushed us into saying, how are we going to ensure that all of our students have a device and access to the internet on that device? And that's a star. That's something that we saw as an opportunity in the pandemic and that we took advantage of it. Another was around the flexibility where learning happens. And we all learned a little bit more about being able to learn doesn't mean that you sit in the chair at the same time every day and in the same classroom and in the same rigid schedule. That learning can and should happen in a much more flexible kind of way. And the pandemic pushed us to learn that in a different kind of way that we otherwise wouldn't have. And finally, that we've had the opportunity with Radius Guest's leadership and others who are heavily involved in our racial equity work. Do all the things that I was talking about earlier, and much, much more around how are we going to realize our dreams and goals for our district and for our students and our families and our staff around racial equity. And just a couple of the wishes. One is that we wish we would have found more ways to support student learning earlier. No doubt that we wish we could have been there from the moment that we went virtual, and every day offered as much as possible. But like for most people, it was a learning process. There was a curve to it. And the second that I'll highlight is that we wish we knew then what we know now. Right? That we wish we would have known that this is a year-plus pandemic, and that we were going to be here a year to the day, back at a board meeting, still wearing masks and still in the middle, really, of a pandemic. And had we known that, we would have been able to come at this probably a little bit differently. But of course, that realization that this is a long-term affair did not come until we were well into the pandemic. So I want to turn it back and again ask if board members here in the room or board members online, if you're willing to jump in and share a star or a wish before we open it up and ask our colleagues to join us in taking any questions that we can answer. So a star or a wish.
Is it an active link on Board Book Premier to go to the Jamboard?
It should be.
Okay, well, let me just click it.
No? Do they have the presentation?
Well, I might be clicking in the wrong spot. That's entirely possible. While we figure that out, Michelle Kuntz has a raised hand. Michelle, do you have a question for right now or for after the Jamboard activity? You're on mute, Michelle. Michelle, can you unmute?
Oh, I'm sorry, so
That's all
sorry.
right.
No, I was waiting to present my wishes and my stars.
Oh, okay. Would you like us to do, is anybody having success with the link? I guess I'm trying to, maybe I should be doing this in Board Book Premier.
I don't think the link is in Board Book Premier either.
It's not in Board Book Premier, and I guess through the presentation, I'm not seeing the way to connect to the link.
Give me 1 second, I'll put it in there.
Awesome, thank you. A link is coming. But I think what I'm sensing is, yes, we would like to add a Post-it note to the Jamboard.
Share with
And
us.
you can just share verbally, right?
Oh,
We don't have
just
to add
verbally?
the Post-it note. Yep. Apologies if that wasn't clear. You're
Oh,
not
okay.
necessarily looking for Post-it notes,
Well, let's,
just a share out
well,
of
then
an
let's
idea.
just share out. So Michelle, I would like to invite you to begin. To share.
Okay, thank you. So 2 stars. First of all, I am in awe of every single staff member at the district and how you all have handled this, and we all have learned a lot. So that's abbreviated my star. The other star is how we've involved the families, and every single student had access to staff member, and that's phenomenal. My wish is that we learn from any mistakes we may have made, and also learn from the new successes, and we don't just go back to what is called normal, which there is no normal. And I know that we wouldn't do that at 287, but I just needed to articulate that, I think. So, thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. And I don't have full access to view everyone's tile, so I would invite other board members to unmute and share a star or a wish if you would like to.
This is Andrea Keene. I'd be happy to share. I think my 2 stars are 2 people who took on new positions in 287 during the pandemic. And I think those stars are Radius Guess and Tanya Allen, who both took on positions that have made a huge difference over the past year. And I think my wish is that we could just get our internet figured out so that all of our students have the capacity to use those great new Chromebooks that they have.
Thank you, Andrea. Well said. Other board members? Stars and wishes. I'd like to share a couple that I have. One is the echo that has been stated well by Michelle and Ben. Thank you for stating no going back to normal. That it didn't serve everyone well. And so it is not my wish to go back to normal. It's our wish to leap forward with the knowledge that we've gained and continue to innovate, which, as Michelle also stated very well, thank you. This is what we do well. This is what 287 is all about. And a wish, and the other star is the equity decision-making model. Having that analysis tool to use an equity lens and to start becoming accustomed to asking better questions upfront with the right decision makers in the room is the right direction to move. So thank you, Radius, for bringing that to the district. And I look forward to us continuing to use that model. And my wish is one of infrastructure. This is a statewide wish. We need to build our infrastructure. And that begins with things as simple as broadband access, because it is a basic utility that everyone needs access to, and our infrastructure for supporting mental health and education. We have an extraordinary district, but it depends upon a healthy infrastructure, and Minnesota has the capacity to do this. I believe in this state, but I wish that it would advance so that we can do more. Any other stars and wishes or questions for Ben and Elizabeth? All right, well, thank you so much. It's exciting to be going back to school. Whether it's March or August, this is a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I would just like to thank both Elizabeth and Ben. They really had a fast start when the pandemic started, and they really haven't slowed down since. And we are grateful for their work and their willingness to just turn on a dime and make things happen for kids and for staff. So thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is ADA and language accessibility. So I'd like to welcome Rachel Hicks, our Director of Communication and Public Relations, to provide this update. Welcome, Rachel.
Evening. Thanks for having me on this topic. It's something that not only I, but a lot of us in the district are excited about. And I'm just here to share some of the improvements that we are making in our ADA compliance and language accessibility. And as all of you know, our district serves deaf and hard of hearing students. We have programs for our students and also a number of members who are deaf and hard of hearing, meaning that our district really should be a leader in ADA compliance and language accessibility. And you know me, I always like to share vulnerable moments that have helped me get better at the things that I do. And some of these improvements for me really came to a head at the beginning of this school year, when we, as a district, we held our first virtual back to school event, where we had our 1,000 staff members come together virtually. And after the back to school event, I had a group of staff contact me and said, you know what? This event wasn't good enough for our deaf and hard of hearing staff. That there could have been a lot of improvements, like live captioning, like ASL interpreters live on screen, and that our staff really were not able to engage in a way that really should meet their needs, and in a way that, as a district that serves deaf and hard of hearing populations, that we should be leading this charge, not trailing behind. So after some conversations with our staff and an audit and looking at what options are out there, we've come up with some solutions to really make some improvements in our language accessibility and ADA compliance. And of course, one of the things that we did also was apply a racial equity impact analysis. And I just want to share, there was a study done, published about a year ago from the University of Michigan that looked at racial disparities in voice recognition programming. And I'm talking about programs like Siri on our iPhones, Alexa on Amazon Alexa, and other programs that use voice recognition algorithms. And what I learned from their study is that those algorithms are based on white-centric voices, and hence automatic captions are often misrepresented, especially those that have people who may speak, that have an accent when they speak, may have certain dialects or perhaps even background noise, that there's a lot of the error rate for voices of people of color are significantly greater than error rate for white voices. So in learning all of this, we looked at what options were available and decided that we really needed to move to a model that was not dependent on automatic captions, which if you look right now in our meeting, and if you go by the raised hand icon, to the right of that is a captions option. And if you turn that on, and I've been watching it throughout this meeting, right now as you're watching, it's an automatic captioning. And I'm seeing errors like, for example, when I heard earlier Ben McGraw say the term Latinx, it came up as Latin accidents. If you're watching how each of our names are coming up as we're speaking names, I'm seeing misspellings across the board, but I'm also seeing more misspellings from of names of staff of color. So those are just some examples of the challenges when we rely on automatic captionings. So the good news is through our conversations with our staff, through doing this research, through really looking at this issue through racial equity lens, we're moving forward with, and this will be beginning next school board meeting, that there'll be live captions during all of our board meetings moving forward, as well as all of any other public meetings or public engagement meetings. I know Tanya Allen has a series of engagement meetings with families coming up this spring. We'll have live captioning at all of those events. And we'll also be able to offer, by request, having a live ASL interpreter signing during a meeting and having an actual visual person on the screen. And then the third thing we'll be doing is switching from automatic captions on all of our videos that are open to the public to using live transcribers to make sure that all of our captioning is accurate and a much higher level than it is with just an automatic captioning. And then finally, I want to show you on our website, and this is available on all our pages. If you go to the right-hand side, there's a little icon here of a person. If you click on that, it gives a variety of, it's an accessibility menu. So for example, if you click on highlight links, it highlights all the links on that page. If you're someone that is reading the text and it's too tiny, you can increase size of the text on the page. It has a dyslexia-friendly mode to view the text in a way that's going to be dyslexia-friendly. and a handful of other ones, you can feel free to play around with those features and check them out. But that's a sample of what the changes that we're making for our students and for our staff and for our families. And again, tonight, the live captioners are here with us. You don't see them in this particular meeting. They will be applied after the fact for this meeting, and then moving forward, we will all be able to see the live captioning as well as our audiences that are watching on the live YouTube link. And I think I see a hand, so I'm happy to take some questions now.
Rachel, thank you. It's just extraordinary work and really exciting to see all of the options. Andrea, you have a question. Go ahead, please.
I have more of a comment. Rachel, thank you so much. This is incredible. It just goes to show sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. But I love how in 287, when you figure out something you don't know, it really gets addressed so quickly. And I just want to share with you that in Wayzata, we've been having terrible issues with our audio for our hybrid regular school board meetings, because everyone who's in person can't understand anything that's being said. And I've been going crazy now. Just while you were talking, I Googled, can I get the captions on Zoom? And you can in English, automatic, not transcribed. But I mean, you just solved a huge problem for Wayzata Public Schools. So thank you very much. I'm going to be turning that on my Zoom. Who knew?
Thank you, Andrea. Adam Seidel, your question or comment?
Yeah, thank you. Can you please repeat for me again all the types of meetings that are moving to the live, not interpreter, what's the word I'm looking for? The live transcription system.
Yep, so at this point, it'll be all of the school board meetings. When you get to a closed session, the live captioning will obviously would stop. Any engagement, like family engagement meetings, basically any public meeting that we're inviting members to the public to. And then all of the videos that we have posted on the District 287 YouTube channel. So any district sponsored meeting or event will have live captioning. And then by request, a live ASL interpreter.
I have a couple questions to follow up on that. One is Chair Neville, do we have is there a board process or a board leadership process for sort of these types of not administrative board functional boardroom decisions when did you work with administration on this?
This is not, to my understanding, this is not really a governance path. Is that answering your question?
Yeah, it does. I don't necessarily agree. I think regardless of the merit of the idea itself, I do think that we're talking about procedures that for a board meeting, right? Where just is the same way that the board, you have the right as the chair to determine when we're, our hybrid, what we're doing in hybrid meetings and other changes like that we make. I just think it's a sort of thing that we would definitely want to have input in. Again, regardless of the merits of it, just something to consider in terms of our control over our processes and procedures and sort of the structures and things around that. I do have a separate question, and that is, what is the cost impact of adding these services? We're talking about, human work, obviously, and I would imagine a somewhat significant amount. What's the fiscal impact?
The cost is about $1.50 per minute.
Do we have a sense of the total fiscal impact, however, though?
I don't at this point. I mean, it's a minute by minute service, so I think it just depends on how long board meetings go. That's hard to know exactly. I think we could do an estimate just based, I need a couple minutes just to do the math for board meetings. But I don't think at this point, I can't anticipate for example, how many engagement sessions we might have each year or how many minutes they might take?
Those were a big part of my question here too. I mean, I'll level that this is certainly definitely a nice feature for members of the public, but it does sound expensive. That response makes it definitely sound expensive. I don't know the total number of hours these other meetings we're having. Maybe I'm overblowing it. If it's just board meetings, that's only one level of cost. But to be frank, this district is, like many districts is facing a significant budget challenge right now. So both from the perspective of 287's budget and for how it impacts the fees being paid in by all of our constituent districts, I do have concerns about adding something like this at this time if we don't know what the final cost impact is. So I am interested in seeing some more information on that as we go towards budget times, because my understanding, based on the information we've received, is that we're looking at we have threats. The scope of the budget shortfalls that we're looking as a result of the pandemic have programming under threat, class sizes under threat, pose some serious challenges. So I think it's a time to be tightened up a little bit on that. And I'm interested in more information on what the cost impact is going to be. And I hope that we're thinking about that going in. And I'm done.
So, thank you, Adam. I want to circle back. And then I also want to invite Superintendent Lewandowski to share some thoughts. I just want to make sure I'm clear on your question before we move on, because I don't want to lose sight of it. Your question is whether or not there should be, the board should vet the procedures for meetings, particularly board meetings, before implementing them. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, I would. Yes. And it was just a more general question of what our policies were around that. If certainly in my district, if anything changes related to anything happening or the recording of, or the procedures around anything related to a board meeting, that's at least talked about by the board, or maybe if it's designated to board leadership in our policy, it happens there, but we're at least consulted or anything like that. So I was just curious about it. Again, and that's regardless of the merits of it. It's just something that most boards I'm aware of maintain at least some control over, because it is just a board functionality. So.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And then your second primary point was concerned about the impact of cost. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Thank you. And I'd like to invite Sandy to just share any additional comments.
Yeah, I think what I would say is that this movement to the current system is really a matter of legal access for individuals with disabilities. And so when we were having board meetings in person, it may not have been as noticeable because we did not have a lot of deaf, hard of hearing people attending a staff meeting. But if we were, we would, and knew that ahead of time, we would professionally have an interpreter there. When it went to a virtual environment, you can see how that multiplied many times over. And I think it was our deaf, hard of hearing staff who brought this to our attention, that our access was very inadequate for anybody that had that kind of disability. And so that's what started us on this journey to find a legally and appropriately accessible way to run a board meeting and other items, as Rachel mentioned. So I just want to clarify that this is an accessibility issue that was driving this decision.
Thank you for sharing that, Sandy. And Crystal, I want to move on to your question or comment. Go ahead, please.
Sure. I think a lot of the conversation has been focusing on the board meeting side of this. I guess my question is more, what are the changes that are taking place for the staff meetings and the all staff gatherings, where it sounds like this is where it first came up as the critical issue. And so that to me should be the priority when I'm thinking about where to expend financial resources, because I also understand Adam's point, like $1.50 a minute does actually add up very quickly when we're talking about staff meetings, board meetings, et cetera. So what's happening on the staff side, and is there an order of priority for where we think we should be targeting and focusing, at least as we're getting started in our current environment?
Yes, so staff meetings will, all kind of district-wide staff meetings will have the live captioning and when it's requested, the live ASL interpreter. You know, in just kind of the quick math here, I think the costs district-wide annually will be between $6,000 and $7,000 to cover public board meetings, engagement sessions, and all staff meetings. And part of the program that we have is where we have the program that we can use, but we can also utilize our own staff to do captioning, which previously when we would have live events, we would have our own District 287 staff for their colleagues do some live ASL services. So the platform, which doesn't have a cost, but we can use that platform and utilize our own staff. Now, there are questions whether you should use your staff in a meeting that's for your staff. And that's another discussion. But I think, you know, as Superintendent Lewandowski mentioned, there is some factors of ADA compliance in public meetings like this, for example, and also meeting the challenge that our staff have asked us to meet, knowing that in our district, this is an audience of ours. And that I do feel we have an obligation to meet that. So to answer your question, I don't think I haven't participated in conversations about necessarily how do we choose the order of who gets what first, but at this point, you know, within the communications budget, I've made some shifts in my budget to be able to have our district cover the costs for this type of compliance and language accessibility.
Thanks, Rachel. That's helpful. And it's actually really helpful just to hear that at this point, it is anticipated to be cost neutral and increasing accessibility. I think that's helpful to hear. And then thinking about how to budget for it moving forward so it does not need to be something that's you know, like accounted for or squeezed in at the last minute, but potentially becomes part of our standard operating procedure. I guess my last question is just, have you tested this at all? Like, have we been able to do any piloting to make sure that like this service is actually going to meet the needs that we are hearing we need to meet?
We did some technical testing earlier this week. And actually, this meeting that we're in right now is our test session. It's not actually captioning right now currently for our meeting or for our YouTube channel, but the captioners are here live with us. And then this will be our test once we apply that to our YouTube channel. And that will give our staff a good opportunity and other stakeholders to help us understand where there may still be gaps and how effective this service is for us. And I know that we'll be watching and letting me know how it's going.
Good. I hope you'll share that with us too.
Thank you. And Michelle Coons, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. As an interpreter, translator, albeit in the technical field, not in education, I just feel like this is a moral imperative. I mean, I can't imagine hiring the quality of staff that we have, and then some of them never understanding what the meeting was about, what during the meeting. So then afterwards they have to, I imagine, go and ask someone, could you tell me what was said? I just find that abhorrent. And I hope that we come up with the funds. First of all, we have to be in compliance with the rules and regs. But to me, I just can't. Well, I can imagine standing in a room with people who don't speak your language. If you take it to that level, it becomes quite clear. This is not acceptable. So thank you. And thanks for the work. This is great work. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Michelle. Any other questions or comments? Rachel, thank you. I appreciate the work to make this accessible. This is about our mission statement. It's about serving everyone in our community. And we know that there are many people in our community who have this need. So thank you very much. We're going to move on to the instructional report. And I'd like to welcome Chad Maxa, to our Executive Director of Strategic Implementation, to provide an overview of strategic planning. Welcome, Chad.
To present. Is everybody seeing my
good
slide?
From my direction. I'm hopeful that that's consistent.
All right, excellent. Well, so tonight I'm just going to provide a brief update on our strategic planning and coherence efforts. Our learning intentions for tonight are, as you see. Oh, did somebody say something? No, okay. Our learning intentions for tonight, they're right there on the slide. We're going to look at briefly the major components of our 2015-20 strategic plan. And I have linked it into this presentation. I'm not going to go through all of the components, but it is there for your reference. Update you on our interim planning process. And I'll share an update on Sandy's coherence Uber goal. And then we'll talk just a little bit about our timeline and what's to come with the next strategic planning process. So I'm going to begin with kind of a brief overview of the tenets of our previous strategic plan. And I know that you're all familiar with our mission statement because we say it out loud at every board meeting. So I'm not going to recite that. And you know, a lot of careful thought and work went into our mission statement when we, embarked upon this journey to create our last strategic plan. And I think it's still very relevant to this day, as are our strategic priorities, which Ben and Elizabeth laid out for you, our core values, our mission outcomes, and also our strategic delimiters. We are still very much committed to advancing racial equity and producing equitable outcomes for our students through our priorities. And those are well-being, evidence-based instruction, trauma responsive and healing-centered practices, and then racial equity, which really is embedded and embodies all of our strategic priorities. And I am confident that it will from this point forward. Our core values, our mission outcomes, delimiters, and priorities are still very much relevant to what we believe in the district, and they continue to serve as a strong foundation for our interim planning process as well. We believe that they will continue to serve as a strong foundation as well for our next strategic planning process. Now I've got a slide up here that some of you may recall seeing early last year. I thought I'd put it back up here because I think it speaks well to the timeline that we had tentatively laid out back then. But as you all know, the pandemic has certainly impacted all of our timelines in our districts. And so we may need to make some adjustments. You know, prior to COVID last March, we had anticipated that our new core planning team would convene probably in the fall or winter of next year and would wrap up for your final approval by June of 2022. And I think only time is going to tell how feasible that will be. So you'll hear more about that for sure. And you know, we still have a lot of work to do to realize the outcomes for our strategic plan. And we have so much momentum, and it continues to build with each passing day because we feel strongly that we're doing the right work and we're doing it at the right time. The pandemic, and on top of that, the events that have occurred across the country with the senseless murders of George Floyd and other Black Americans makes it unbelievably clear that we need to take the opportunities that the pandemic has provided us, and we need to use that, and specifically so that we do not return to normal. And I think you've heard that tonight several times from Chair Neville and Ben, Elizabeth, and others. We have doubled down and recommitted to our strategic priorities, and you might look at this and say, well, wait a minute, we just had this last plan, and now we're in limbo, and so between that and our new planning process. But it really doesn't feel that way. As I mentioned earlier, it really is our foundation, and it really helps us focus on the priorities and the things that we think are the most important. And we're going to just continue to build off of that as we move forward. As you can see from the slide also, we are planning to take some specific actions in the interim that we think will also help prepare us for the next plan. And it's going to help us become a more agile organization that will be better prepared to respond if we need to dial back, if the pandemic comes back to bite us, which I think we're all really, really hoping that does not happen. But the bottom line is we believe that the specific action areas that you see here are just going to help us increase flexibility for students that not only need it during the pandemic, but that also need it even after the pandemic, and certainly needed it before it hit. And in particular, our students of color. I also want to point out that one of them there is a continuum of services. And really what that's about is a focus on meeting our member districts' needs and our students' needs. And it's so very important to us. And I have to imagine that I haven't really talked to Sandy about this. And again, we are still planning, but I have to believe that would be a very important area of focus for us in our future strategic planning process. Over the last few years, we have learned a great deal about implementation science, and really trying to incorporate that into our plans so that we can be very intentional about what we're doing and making sure we're doing the right things and that we're really monitoring that. And I think that the new version of our implementation plans that we've just created really helps us take a more pragmatic approach to plans. Implementation science is very daunting. It sounds great in theory, but then when you start developing a very comprehensive and ginormous implementation plan, oftentimes they get put on a shelf and they don't really come to life. And I want to take this opportunity to thank Ben McGrath, and he helped us take our version 2.0 to the our first plan, and then version 2.0 to the next level. And I think it's really important, and I was grateful for his help with that. I also want to thank our strategic leadership teams that have been working tirelessly to create their implementation plans. And just a little tip: you're going to get a C1 tonight from Dr. John Voss, and I think you'll start to see where all of our work with implementation plans and coherence really have come together with the plan that he put together. We're also going to continue to strive to ensure that our leadership teams that are working on these plans really are diverse by their roles and race, just to make sure that we are not that we have all voices and perspectives at the table. It's so critical. And ultimately, our plans have also, which our previous plans did not have, our racial gap goals, so that we're being very intentional about how we're going to tackle the disparate outcomes that we see between our white students and students of color. We also have Smarty goals, and it kind of sounds like the candy, but it's a little different. You probably heard of SMART goals. They're specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. And the IE on the Smarty is inclusive and equitable. And in terms of inclusive, we're really working hard on these leadership teams and making sure that we are including staff of all colors, all different roles, like I said, to ensure that they're involved in the planning and decision making. The equity component really, it prompts us to zero in and focus on our those disparities that we see between BIPOC and white students, and how we are going to address that. We've made some other improvements on making it easier for those involved in the implementation plans and actually executing on the work to be able to know who's responsible for what. And some of our earlier plans were just a little messier that way, and so we've really cleared that up, and we're being much more explicit now as well about the behavioral changes that we need to see with our with all of us, because we all have to shift our practices and mindsets and attitudes. And so I think that's another very important piece. And last but not least, they are aligned to our SIPs, our school improvement plans. And as I said before, we are really we are utilizing vertical leadership teams to do this work, and that's critical to our coherence work. And again, soon you're going to see a great example of that. We all are experiencing, I would say, just we're drinking through fire hoses, multiple fire hoses, and there's a lot coming at us. And we know that we're also trying to lead forward and really trying to not go back to normal. And I think that it's just so important, despite all of the barriers and all of the unknowns. We got to push forward and come together, and we all have to work together to have a better normal. I'll touch briefly on Sandy's Uber goal, and I'll read it out loud here, and then I'll just kind of cover some of the updates from that work. But Sandy's Uber goal was by June 30th, 2021, district administration will have, or 2022 will have, enhanced communication and built structures to begin assessing and increasing coherence within the organization. And so with that, we have worked very hard to be crystal clear and consistent about our communications around our strategic priorities. And when I say we, I mean the leadership across the whole organization. We have also continued to align, and it's an iterative process, all of our agendas. And you heard earlier about our racial equity impact analysis tool. That is a part of our agendas. And when we make a decision, we have a decision point checkbox for each outcome. So if we're making a decision, we invoke that tool and we use it. And so that's been very important. And in addition to that, we have we've been reviewing our current KPIs for effectiveness internally for our own use, and we're starting to think about that as well for our members. Are these KPIs what we need internally and what our members need? And we continue to learn more, and we're going to continue working on those. We are also in the process of designing a new technology platform to make it more accessible for our leadership teams, because right now we certainly have a ways to go in that area. So we are also, in addition to focusing on PD for our staff, we're doing the same thing with our leadership team, and we are going to work harder than we have before on sustainable and ongoing PD in our leadership meetings. As you are all aware, so much is going on that the day-to-day work sometimes can really impede our ability to focus on our own PD as leaders. And so we will continue our coherence and our focus training as leaders. And I think, we're also really working hard to maximize the time spent in our leadership meetings, so we can minimize the as much of the operational day-to-day things, and really focus in on those strategic components that we really need to be focusing on as a strategic implementation team. And let's see here. Well, I think we are now at the point where I'm going to turn it over to John, and you are going to see a shining example of the work that John and his teams have done to prepare our academic plans for the next 3 years. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to John. And John, all you got to do is just give me a ding when you're ready to move to the next slide.
Thank you, Chad. No pressure there. As we've been looking forward to planning for the next few years, we realize that as much as we want to shift our thinking, we also can't afford to start everything over from the beginning. As one of our coaches pointed out when looking at an early draft, it would be nice to have a year or two and not always feel like we're starting from scratch. So you can go ahead, ding. While the environment has changed after all the disruptions of 2020, our focus on student outcomes remains at the center. And the groundwork that we've been laying over the last few years still provides us with a solid foundation to build from. What we're looking at is the evidence-based instruction part of our strategic initiatives and the development of coherence around the evidence-based practices that will have the biggest impact on student outcomes, all while recognizing that racial equity and responsive systems of support tie together instruction with our other strategic initiatives. Go ahead. It's no secret that we face some pretty daunting challenges. Any one of these requires significant attention, and this is not an exhaustive list. It's just the top 10 for teaching and learning. And they're not new initiatives, they're just building in intensity. What's new is a concerted effort to connect them together. So things like social justice and racial equity go hand in hand with how we start to view our changing standards for areas like science and social studies. And as we develop an MTSS framework, we also are weaving in core instruction, working on our trauma-informed practices, building out our family engagement improvements. And then we also continue to build up our efforts toward credit-based diplomas for all of our students throughout special education, and becoming more consistent in our cross-district offerings through a common course catalog and the continuing expansion of the literacy curriculum that we adopted last year. So you can go ahead. And we believe that if we can consolidate this broad array of strategies into a set of practices that impact many different student needs, then all of us, students, teachers, educational assistants, support staff, and administrators, will feel less overwhelmed that we're trying to do 10 things at once, and will be more effective at improving student outcomes overall. You can go ahead. The process for building coherence in this regard involves taking evidence-based practices, or EBPs as we call them, in key areas and aligning and embedding them within well-designed curriculum units. We have a set of literacy practices through the grants that we've received. We have instructional EBPs from our framework around classroom instruction that works, extensive support for our SEL 3 signature practices. Plus, we have culturally relevant instruction and trauma-informed practices from our work with Bruce Perry and the neurosequential model. We also have a really committed cadre of instructional coaches. But if we don't weave all these things together, we'll forever be battling cognitive dissonance from coming at this from a lot of different directions. You can go ahead. What we're building is an understanding of how these practices align and can include common language across a number of them. So for instance, a lot of the practices that we're emphasizing in support of literacy also reinforce the practices that have been proven to provide a high instructional impact. We started on this a few years ago, so now we can carry it forward by finding the common language to make connections and build those into our curriculum so it flows naturally throughout all classroom instruction. Go ahead. Our roadmap to reach this shows how it plays out over time in the development of common elements of curriculum and instructional design. We'll start with revisiting and solidifying our learning targets to meet the demands for social justice standards, culturally relevant teaching, and SEL in addition to academic standards. Then from that foundation, we'll be able to beef up our instructional strategies in literacy, add feedback loops to show progress, come up with common formative assessments and a system of supports for helping students overcome the opportunity gaps that they've been experiencing, with the end goal to reach a mastery-based system where grades and progress reports show really clear evidence of student mastery of the specific learning goals that we've set. It'll take some time to put all that together, so we'll be working on specific areas each year along that map. Go ahead. And as I said, we're not starting over, but building on what we've learned and developed going back at least to 2018-19. That year, we started out with incorporating classroom instruction that works, or CITW, as our instructional framework. And we also were awarded our first literacy grant to support coaching literacy evidence-based practices. At the same time, we were developing, still there. At the same time, we were embedding SEL and counter narratives into our curriculum, which we all continued into last year, and at the same time last year adopted a K-8 literacy curriculum called Success for All before we were forced to yield to a lot of the realities of 2020. Then this year, we've been able to continue moving forward, though we've had to make some adjustments for shifting environments and the attention needed to staff and student well-being. So what we can look forward to in the months and years ahead as we get into years 4, 5, and 6 is building from that foundation to expand and improve and operationalize these practices that will all impact student outcomes. You can go ahead then. As we get into summer, the student programs that we have are ramping up to address a lot of the things that we've had to yield to over the course of the last year and a half. So we've got a special education extended school year as we normally do, but we're adding on to that an enrichment program for our special ed students. We're continuing our area learning center summer academies for credit recovery. We offer our Northern Star online courses for credit recovery as well, and also for acceleration and enrichment. And then our West Suburban Summer School provides courses for acceleration and enrichment for students across K-12. A lot of these things we'll be able to help develop together so that we can use some of the things we've learned from all of them within each of the programs that we offer. If you go ahead, we'll see how starting this summer, we'll be able to support the planning and development with a lot of our grant funds and special money that we're receiving. We'll have the opportunity to prepare for summer school and also organize work groups for instructional planning and curriculum development. This way we'll have the time to prepare to come back ready, refreshed, excited, recapturing some of the joy of working together. And with all that we have to accomplish in a limited amount of time, we'll really need to focus on how we can make the greatest impact in all these facets of learning. We'll need to spark student inquiry, excitement, and comfort in what they've learned over the course of the past year and how students can be confident in building on that for the future. So this will provide us an opportunity to narrow down our learning essential goals and make them relevant, exciting, inspiring, and tie together a lot of those critical learning needs. We implement these into next year, then we'll be in a much better position to expand and increase down the road. So we'll continue to share details and successes as we plan the next steps next year and beyond. And then Chad, I think this goes back to you.
Indeed, it does. Thank you so much for sharing that with us all, John. Appreciate that. It's a great example of how it's all coming together. All right. All right, is everybody seeing the future slide? All right. So let's see, where are we at here? If I could just take 1 minute here to make sure I got. So we are obviously at the point where we're discussing our next strategic planning process and what that might look like. That'll be ongoing, and we'll continue to plan over the spring and summer and really work on developing that. Again, as I said earlier, it's really hard to know if we're going to hit that the approval date of June 2022, but it sure would be great. I do believe that this will not be your typical standard strategic planning process. I think we are going to really have a strong foundation and focus on racial equity to drive the development of that plan. I am hopeful that the superintendent search timeline will allow for the new superintendent to be involved in the planning process, and we will certainly be communicating with you as we have new developments and decision points and as appropriate, and we'll definitely come back and you'll hear more in the very near future. So I think I've got a bonus for you because you've all been a captive and attentive audience. And so you get to see the unveiling of something new. If you look in the top left-hand corner, you'll see our current logo. And we decided after Rachel told us that we really need to focus on this, and we'd all kind of figured out, hey, you know, we really need to do something to brighten up our logo a little bit. So Rachel worked with her graphic designer, and we now have a new logo that pops. It's essentially the same. It's just much easier to read and see. The racial equity around the outside was really difficult to see. We brightened it all up, and now everything is much clearer. And so I want to thank Rachel for her work on that. And you're the first to get a glimpse of it. So I hope you like it.
Mm-hmm.
And I will go ahead and open it up for questions, Chair Neville. And if it's okay, I may need to call on other leaders depending upon the questions and the level of detail they're looking for.
Certainly. Well, thank you so much, Chad and John. It's exciting, and it's exciting that strategic planning is just streamlined into what we do. There's always a reason to talk about it, and I think that's the most vibrant thing about it. Board members, any questions or comments? Sam Sant, go ahead.
I do about the process. So I don't know because if it's different with 287 or not, but at least I know in Robbinsdale, things like, our vision, our mission statement and strategic plan, we, as a board more so, actually, we work on that as a group. I guess, is this done here differently, being that staff is doing it and keeping us along? I mean, what's the process for that?
So what we had done in the past is we had a core planning team, and Sandy communicated with superintendents in each of your respective districts, and they sent a representative. In some cases, it might be the superintendent. In other cases, it might be a director of special education or another member of their administration. And from that, we built out our core planning team. And so there was always representation from your districts, but it was not, and we did have board members from the 287 board there as well. So, but we definitely had a pretty good sized core planning team with a lot of different people and throughout districts and within 287. And so I felt like there's pretty good representation. And I know that several of you have participated on the core planning team. I'm looking at Michelle right now because you're just right there. And so she may have something she would like to add. Can't hear you, Michelle.
I'm so sorry.
Oh, there we go.
Yep. So yes, a veteran core planning team member. Those were actually very fun. There's a part of me that says, oh, we're not going to do it like we did, because it was an opportunity for the board to really get to know some of our member district people and each other. So, but I am very excited to see what else you bring forward on this. And I love the new logo. So thank you.
Sam, is that helpful?
Yes.
Great. And Sam,
I would just add, we did have students as well at the last one. And that was the first time we had involved students, but they were there as well.
All right, and Andrea, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Regina. I have a comment and a question for John Boss. When I read through the slides earlier today in preparation for the meeting, I kind of read through them. I didn't really get it, but today, this evening, when you talked about aligning the language of the evidence-based practices to decrease the overwhelm for teachers, it was a huge aha moment for me. That makes so much sense. But I also was thinking what a massive undertaking that is to try to get all that organized. So I just want to thank you for that really impressive work. That makes a lot of sense to me. And you talked a little bit about the component of the social emotional learning and that there were 3 parts. I think you mentioned counter narratives. Could you just quickly remind me what are the other 2 major components of the SEL learning?
The counter narratives are more of a culturally relevant teaching element and an equity practice. The 3 signature practices in SEL are ones that we've tried to use in a lot of different classrooms, and it starts with an engaging opening and an opportunity to learn and apply and an optimistic closure. So those are things that we've used across the board for a number of years. We've got a lot of really good SEL coordinators who have helped support our teachers in learning that on and off and continuous.
Thank you so much. Can I ask a follow-up question, Regina?
Yes, please.
Just in regard to those 3 components, then I'm just kind of curious, is there a way to kind of align the evidence-based practice language that's used in SEL work to make sure that it's also connected to equity work and our healing practices?
There is, and that's something that the SEL coordinators and some of the equity groups and leaders and our coaches have spent a lot of time on, is lining up some of those areas where there is crossover, because like I said, if it feels like it's 10 different things, it's always going to be a little overwhelming and increases the cognitive load. But if we can streamline it to a smaller number of activities that embed all of those things, then we'll get a lot more mileage on how it plays out.
And I would just add, and I haven't even asked Tanya this, but we can and should have Tanya come in and do a similar presentation for how our SEL trauma mental health work is shaping up, not unlike what John showed you for some of our instructional work. We can and should do that with Tanya as well in those areas.
Is that helpful, Andrea? Great. Fantastic. Thanks. Ruthie, welcome. Your question or comment?
I would say very good work. A lot of, you can see the depth of everything that in pulling this together. It sounds exciting. I was wondering, how do you involve the family members at all in the planning? I know the students are. Are there any family members involved?
Well, I can speak to that. That is definitely one of our specific actions that we're working on to increase the involvement of our families in the planning of whether it's curriculum or other things. And Tanya's been doing a great job with town halls and other formats to engage families and get them involved in our planning. And as Sandy mentioned, we this last strategic plan, we did have students at actually sitting there with the core planning team working with us. And we are going to continue to double and triple down on that. So they are actively involved in our planning process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Additional questions or comments? I don't see any other hands. So again, thank you. This is exciting to just move forward, and this is a great, thoughtful process to begin that phase of our next journey on the strategic plan. I particularly appreciate the graphics and the fibers of the rope together. For me, that was an image that I thought, oh, of course, these are all of the different things we're talking about. But just seeing it with that image, for me, was really helpful to create the seamless direction that we're hoping to achieve. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is item 8, Business Services and Labor Relations Report. And I'd like to welcome Michelle Axel, our Director of Human Resources, to present our proposed calendar for 2021-2022. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you, Chair Neville and board members. I've got an action item today for you related to the district calendar for the 2021-2022 school year. I hope you've all had an opportunity to take a look at the calendar. I just want to highlight some key parts of the calendar and about how do we at 287 put this together. So we first gather information about the member district calendars. We align whenever possible and where we can related to the transportation. So essentially when you're serving students, we want to also be serving students. That aligns with transportation. We also have to look at and review the contract parameters between our teacher and our educational assistant in instructional local 2209 and our SEIU local 284 contract. This year, let me highlight a couple items. One is that we have adjusted our first day of school for students. That first day will be on Wednesday, September 8th, and it is to avoid starting school on a holiday for some of our individual students. We have also included, as we have in past years, what we would call 2 cushion days. So we have 172 student contact days. And we also recognize for the first time starting next year, for the full calendar year, we will be utilizing our option to using e-learning days. So we'll watch that play out, and there may be an adjustment in future years in terms of the number of student contact days. The other that I'd like to highlight is that we always work hard to align our staff development days with end of quarter alignment, so that it allows our instructional licensed teachers to be able to focus on reporting. And also it's a great time to circle up and review how the last quarter went and come together as in a collaborative way. I want to just take a moment and thank the team of administrators and Local 2209. Building this calendar takes a village. And I don't know if any of you have ever had the opportunity to build a school calendar, but you look at it, you count the days, you look at it again, and you count the days again, and everybody believes that we have it correct. And I want to just thank Rachel. About 6:20 tonight, she informed me we were incorrect on a specific date, and we actually had all missed the date for President's Day. We had it aligned on February 14th instead of February 21st. So I just want to call out and say thank you to Rachel, which actually is thank you to Adam, her admin support who noticed that, but also for all of you. It may seem like an easy endeavor, but it certainly takes a whole village and support to put a calendar together for the school year. So, any questions about our calendar, the dates, and our decision-making process related to the calendar?
Thank you, Michelle. And Anne, I see that you have a hand up, and then that'll be followed by Sam Sant. So Anne, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Chair Neville. Just on that first day of school, we had a lot of conversation in St. Louis Park about that holiday, and in particular that the holiday is actually 2 days, Tuesday and Wednesday. And we ultimately made the same decision that you have put here, which is to take the first day of school on Wednesday, because we really looked at our attendance data for the Rosh Hashanah holiday for the past few years. And the vast majority of our students had missed the first day, but not both the days of the holiday. So I guess I'm wondering, number one, are we able to kind of say the same thing here? It's mostly students missing the first day if they're missing the Rosh Hashanah holiday. And then I guess if we did have a student or students who needed to miss both of those days, just that, and I think this was kind of our thought process in St. Louis Park, is that, we'll bend over backwards to make sure that they get welcomed to school when they come.
And absolutely. And it was interesting recognizing that across the board, across the state, and particularly the metro area, the recognition of this holiday, right, landing on the first day of school for students, which historically has not been the case. We know that it has landed very close to the beginning of the school year, but not at that time. And we were watching, and as our member districts were making those decisions collectively, HR directors across the metro area and state talking. And so we just circled up together and we just literally agreed that first day would align with the majority of where our member districts are going, and then recognizing the decision making that went in, as you stated, within your own district and others. So we kept with that alignment.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Michelle.
Go ahead, Sam.
Was there any consideration into extending the next school year, just because of the pandemic and the vast amount of lost days that we've missed in the past year, educational days for children, and with the passage of the stimulus dollars and increased funding from the state possibly, that we would kind of add more on into future years to help make up for some of those lost in-person days?
I'm going to let, if there's somebody else who'd like to speak on that consideration, if that has even started as a conversation or engaged consideration.
Yes, we have not really had any serious conversation about that, primarily from a funding standpoint. And maybe in the near future at a board meeting, we can have May review the funding, the federal funding that's coming to us. We know what we got for the first pot of federal money. We're in dispute with MDE right now about the second pot, and of course, we don't know about the third pot. So that is a factor. We will have a very robust summer school program, I will say that, but not in extending days beyond the calendar.
Thank you. Other questions or comments before we approve the proposed calendar? And hearing none, is there a motion to approve the 2021-2022 school calendar as presented? Moved by Sam Sant. Is there a second?
Second, Keen.
Seconded by Andrea Keen. And I invite board members to unmute in preparation for the roll call vote. And Crystal, go ahead, please.
Andreessen.
Aye.
Brackey is an aye. Casey.
Aye.
Keen.
Yes.
Dallas.
Yes.
Kuntz.
Aye.
Marty.
Aye.
Neville.
Aye.
Sant.
Yes.
Seidel.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you all. And Michelle, thanks to you, Rachel, and your team. I know from experience the detail of this particular planning team. It is extraordinary. It makes a big difference. It's the foundation for the whole year. So thank you very much. We'll move on to board business, item 9. And for chair report this evening, just a quick overview of the workshop that we held on February 25th with the MSBA, Minnesota School Board Association workshop, hiring the right superintendent. As we've announced, we'll be engaged in a superintendent transition. We're fortunate to have a great deal of time in order to do some thoughtful planning and preparation for this transition. So the workshop, just as a summary, provided an overview of Minnesota statute and guidelines for board members on conducting this search. It was also helpful to have staff members present, specifically Radius guests Rachel Hicks, Ann Becker, and Amanda Achterkirk. So at this time, I'd like to just ask if there are any questions or more information that board members would appreciate before we engage in discussion. We're not ready to begin our full discussion yet. We'll allot a greater amount of time for that as we figure out what our next steps are as a board. But the intent of the workshop was to provide some basic information for that process. So my primary question is whether anybody has a request for information either from MSBA or another source as a pre-planning process. And that's okay. It was a good workshop. I appreciated everything. Crystal, oh, I see your hand. Thank you. Crystal.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say that I think what will be helpful is for us to do some work categorizing what are the biggest decisions that need to be made earliest on in the process, and trying to map out like the series of decisions and at what point in time we need to make them, because I think, at least speaking for myself, there's just so many. And so I think getting that structure and order will hopefully help all of us have a sense of what we should be thinking about at the given moments in time that come down the road.
Thank you. And just to make sure I have that correct, basically organizing our list of decisions that need to be made, categorizing them by the biggest decision, the series, and providing the structure for that process. And yes, I agree. Thank you. That will be helpful in guiding our next steps. Any other questions or comments? So stay tuned. We will be allotting some more board time so that we can discuss how we want to proceed as a group. And that'll happen during this spring. So just watch for the planning on that. And in the meantime, please don't hesitate to reach out with an email if you have a question or background that we can gather. Next up on the agenda is the National School Board Association Annual Conference. That'll be held virtually this year, April 8th through 10th. This is an action item in terms of approval of funding to send board members, or to, I guess, we're not sending them anywhere other than to a link, to the correct link. But this will be an action item to approve that. So usually 287 sends 2 board members to the conference. This year, NSBA is offering a buy 1 registration, get 1 registration free. So this is an opportunity. Board member Ruthie Dallas has already expressed an interest to attend. And I'm curious, is there anybody else who is interested in attending through 287 who might not have this worked out with their home district? And I think that we have Shannon. Are you interested?
Yeah, I would be if nobody else wants to take the BOGO option.
Why not? Exactly. And
Right.
when I'm correct, that just falls under tonight's action item. This is 2, so this works. Thank you. That's very helpful. Are there any questions before we vote on this? Okay. Well, thank you, Shannon. That'll be great. And Ruthie and Shannon, please share back what you learned. I think that it's just a terrific opportunity.
Yes.
So is there, pardon me, Ruthie?
I say yes, will do. It's usually exciting event.
Yes, thank you. So at this time,
It is an action item. I think you need to call for a vote.
yep.
Yeah.
I need to
Okay,
get-
gotcha. You were moving
No,
that
thank you.
direction. Okay.
I think I may be muffling as well,
Okay.
too, so I apologize.
No.
Is there a motion to approve the action item on NSBA?
I so moved. Andrea.
Moved by Andrea Keene, and did I hear this? Who did I hear the second from?
It was Ann Casey.
Ann Casey, seconded by Ann Casey. Thank you. And Crystal, would you please call the roll?
Andreessen.
Aye.
Brackey is an aye. Casey.
Aye.
Keene.
Yes.
Dallas.
Yes.
Kuntz.
Aye.
Marty.
Aye.
Neville.
Aye.
Sant.
Yes.
Seidel.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you. And it's exciting, Shannon and Ruthie. Thank you very much for attending. Next, AMSD report. Crystal, Ann, Andrea, and Ruthie, do any of you have a report this evening?
I've got it.
Able to attend.
So Andrea?
Yep, I have it. Okay, thanks, Ruthie. The Board of Directors met on March 5th. The first guest speaker was Representative Ruth Richardson. She's the chair of the House Education Policy Committee. She talked about how the top priority is response to the pandemic. She sees an opportunity to revision and innovate education to increase our outcomes. Another priority is addressing persistent disparities evident in discipline and the opportunity and achievement gaps. House bills reflect that all students do better when we have a diverse school staff across the board. And she described how Grow Your Own is an effective strategy. Good job, 287. She didn't say that, I said that. Be supportive of passing funding ASAP for summer school. And then at that point in the meeting, my coffee pot overflowed and I had to leave. And I heard that Sandy was asking a question and I missed it. So Sandy, do you remember what you asked and what she said?
I don't.
Oh. Okay. Sorry to put you on the spot. I should have warned you. The next guest speakers were from NWEA, Dr. Karen Lewis and Dr. Nate Jensen, and they presented about learning during COVID, initial findings on student reading and math achievement and growth. And just as a reminder, NWEA is a research-based, not-for-profit organization that supports students and educators worldwide by creating assessments that precisely measure growth and provide insights to help tailor instruction. I know that in Wayzata we use the MAP test to measure student academic growth. I think lots of AMSD districts use the MAP test. So for the reading, the growth assessments showed results that were similar to past years, which is good news. And I might be getting the details wrong, but they tested last spring, this fall, and there's some testing results coming in for this spring. And they found that for reading, surprisingly, the results looked similar to other years. So that's pretty good news. Math growth assessments were more concerning, with a significant loss in growth compared to past 2 years across the country. Other bad news and a caution to the validity and reliability of the overall results is that many students are missing from schools across the country. So it's unknown if the scores are really representative of what's happening for all students. The results are likely underestimating the overall negative effects of COVID, especially for underserved populations. They had a really great slide deck giving lots more details than that. So if you head to the AMSD website, you can find that under meeting materials. And then last, Scott Krunkus gave his executive director report. He talked a little bit about the budget surplus, 1.6 billion. Policy bill deadlines are coming up this month. Budget targets will be released sometime in late March before the spring break. Finance bill deadline is April 9th, and then they're supposed to be done on May 17th, which is coming up quick. AMSD partnered with MSBA, MASBO, and other statewide education organizations to collect statewide data and then write a letter to the governor and leadership to advocate for COVID relief education legislation to be passed before their spring break. Items highlighted as the greatest needs include funding for the mitigation of enrollment declines, funding for summer school to help students bounce back academically and to support mental health, increased flexibility for distance learning through the next school year, 21-22, and finally, streamlining the processes that allow districts to procure short call substitute teachers, which I know has been a really big problem in some of our districts. We passed the legislative priorities document, and this week, bills were heard on the constitutional amendment in the House, on an education savings account that might be used for private school tuition in the Senate. And it's kind of that time of the session where bills are just flying so fast and furious, it's kind of hard to keep up. So if you're interested in those details, you could check out the bill tracker at the AMSD website as well. And it's starting to come together in in the omnibus bill, so it might be easier to keep track of. But that's all I have. Any questions or comments?
Thank you, Andrea. Any questions or comments? Thank you so much. We have our calendar in as part of the board package. The next virtual breakfast for Local 2209 is April 27th at 7 a.m. So you have a little time to get that on your calendar. And if you'd like to attend, please let Juanina Mgini know and she will send you a link. Any other comments for once around the table before we propose adjournment? Well, thank you all. Thanks for being here both in person and virtually. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Michelle Kuntz.
Moved by Michelle and second?
Ruthie Dallas, second.
Seconded by Ruthie Dallas. Crystal, would you please call the roll?
Andreessen.
Aye.
Brackey is an aye. Casey.
Aye.
Keen.
Yes.
Dallas.
Yes.
Kuntz.
Aye.
Marty.
Aye.
Neville.
Aye.
Sant.
Yeah.
Seidel.
Yes.
Motion carries. We are adjourned. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone, good to see you.
Bye.
Ta-ta.